Everybody, so a little bit different circumstance for this particular Pencast. So Drew and I shot this in advance, and we wanted to be able to record it because we're actually out this week. But my card failed as soon as I went to plug it into the computer. So all the recording seemed like it was fine, and then when I went to import it, there was nothing there on the video front. Thankfully, I recorded the audio separately, and since it's such a long video, we honestly just didn't have time to reshoot it. So we're adapting it a little bit this week. We are going to be using Drew's video and then my audio. So the audio podcast will be unaffected, but for this video on YouTube here, you're just gonna see static images of my face. I'm really sorry, but that's the best that we got for you this week. It was kind of either this or nothing. So hope looking at Drew's face is good enough. And if not, sorry. Hopefully we'll work all this out and be back to normal next week. Anyway, thanks. All right, I am also recording.
All right, we're going to make this happen, man.
I think it's already happening, Drew.
We have formatted just the best we've ever formatted cards in our lives. So I feel like we're starting this with a bang.
We are. I need to pull up my notes, though. There we go. All right, now I'm ready.
I'm hard copying it today, man. Listen.
Hard copy. Look at this.
That's right.
You must
Forge resistant.
You must feel pretty prepared. You didn't see all the shenanigans I put in there since you printed that out, I guess.
Oh, gracious me. All right, well, surprise shenanigans incoming.
Shenanigans. Feels like a good nickname for Shannon. Shenanigans.
That's true.
You ever work that into anything? You feel like
No. I have lots of nicknames for her, though, obviously.
Yeah. You can call them Shannonanigans.
I could.
When she gets up to shenanigans or Shannonanigans.
I could. And honestly, most of my nicknames for her are not even related to anything. They're just gibberish nonsense.
Yeah. Sounds about right. Okay. You ready to do this?
Yeah, man. Let's roll and rock.
All right. Welcome, everybody, to episode number 51 of the Goulet Pencast, where fountain pens are still a thing. I am Brian Goulet.
I am Drew Brown.
And we are here from Goulet Pens to deliver this casual and informal, tangential and extraneous, superfluous and extemporaneous fountain pen show where we talk about what's going on at the Goulet Pen Company and in our fountain pen lives. In today's show, we're going all Q&A. All of it. Only Q&A in this episode. We're not going to all the Qs that are possible, but we're just only going to do that. I just felt like I was misleading. I didn't feel like we were going to be like, because I feel like we could do like a 24-hour blitz and just continually answer questions. But we're not going to do that. Anyway, full disclosure, we're shooting this ahead of time because this is the week that we're taking off. I'm going to be taking my kids to an art camp. They'll be doing like a little painting camp thing, which is pretty fun because they're out of school now. And that's fun, and they can do things during the day. So we're making some family time for that. And Drew is going to be up to who knows what.
I'm just taking it off because Brian's off, and I find myself much less busy when he's not around. So, yes. And I always have a hard time taking time off. I always end up with a surplus at the end of the year. So I'm trying not to do that this year.
Yeah, he just loves the work so much. It's just
it's not work when you're having fun.
That's right. Find a job you love, and you'll never work another day in your life. Anyway, so we're recording this on June 7th so that we can have it available to you at the end of June when we're actually taking this time off. We're going to be talking about how writing with your nib affects the tipping over time. We are going to be talking about pens and ink that we felt didn't quite live up to the hype, our favorite broad nib pens, our best entry-level gold nibs, if ink will last 2 years or longer in the bottle. And we have a lightning round of questions where we for sure will not be as concise as we're setting out to be.
I will be.
We're going to try. I won't. I already typed some notes in there and I was like, just reading this is going to be more than 30 seconds. But anyway, we should have a lot of fun today. We won't have, updates on new stuff or any of that because we just can't predict weeks into the future. So we're going to keep it just timeless. We're going to make this a timeless episode so that we can publish it in advance. But anyway, that's what we got. So without further ado, Drew, let's do some Q&A.
Alrighty, coming to us first is our old friend Smallest Stitches. And Smolest Stitches asks, a dumb cue. Can you accidentally overpolish a nib by writing with it? That's not a dumb cue. Stitches, not a dumb cue.
You know, he wrote
That's
a dumb
cue. That's just a good. That's a good cue.
Wrote a dumb cue with a colon. I feel like he's calling one of us a dumb cue. Maybe. Like maybe it's addressing like, hey, dumb cue.
Like a quack.
Can you? Yeah, dumb quack. Maybe is that what you?
Oh
no,
man. Well, I did pose as that horse doctor that one time.
No, that's true.
Like a doctor who was also a horse, you know.
Oh, of course. I think that was assumed. Yeah. Okay, so can you accidentally overpolish a nib by writing with it? I put no, not really, because writing with it, you would sort of be undoing the things that traditionally overpolishing would do. Like I think of things like baby's bottom and stuff like that. Overpolishing, I think, is kind of an interesting term because it you could have a couple different consequences that happen from overpolishing depending on what stage of the nib grinding, nib tuning is getting overdone. Basically you end up with varying degrees of problems. And actually one of the best resources for this is Richard Bender. If you go to his website, richardspens.com, he actually has like his nib, tuning guide that he uses when he teaches things at like pen shows and stuff like that. Has some great visuals and breakdowns and stuff. I'm not going to publish them here because it's free to use on his website, but he says not to use it elsewhere. So go check it out on his site. But he's got some really good visuals there that explain kind of what I'm talking about. So I think traditionally, overpolishing, you're going to have baby's bottom. You're going to have, especially a lot of like European pen makers or European companies, especially on the bigger nibs, mediums and broads and things, they want them to be smooth. So they will, traditionally overpolish it, especially at the step, because when you first grind the nib and make the tip of it round, you then need to smooth the inside where the slit has been cut because it's a pretty sharp edge and you're going to catch the paper and it's going to cut really bad. So they polish that inside and then you end up with what's called baby's bottom. It basically looks like a baby's bottom.
Looks like a butt.
Yeah. And if you over polish, especially at that step, then you can end up with ink that isn't flowing all the way down to the paper unless you write with extra pressure. So that's where you'll get skipping, you'll get hard starting. It'll be smooth as heck, but you might have some flow issues. That's probably the most common over polishing thing that we see, especially new from a factory.
But that can't be done by writing.
No, it in fact, it's actually kind of undone by writing because one of the remedies for that is to essentially like polish away, the part of the tip that is keeping the ink from making contact with the page.
You flatten the butt.
Yeah, you're flattening the butt of the baby's bottom.
Calling it baby's bottom is just a nice way to not just call it like grown man bottom. It's just it doesn't matter what kind of butt it is. A butt's a butt.
Technically, I don't know. Butts can be different, Joe. I feel like put that in the quote book. Butts
baby's
can be
bottom.
different.
Somebody was like, all right, let's workshop this. What's the least offensive butt?
And they're like, baby's butt. Yeah, I feel like it's the most acceptable butt to talk about in a pen setting. I don't know. It's a weird term, but there you go. I guess everybody's pretty familiar with that. It's
what's known, so that's what we're using.
Especially when you think about what would be in the place where the ink is in that baby's butt. Anyway, don't think about it too deeply. This is the term that's been used.
But that's what eventually will happen. The remedy to that over polishing in that crevice, whatever you want to call it, you flatten out those two lumps, and that helps it. Usually, you flatten it out using some sort of an abrasive. You take it to a nib grinder, and they fix it for you. It's generally not done by just writing a whole lot.
No, but
eventually
the paper is a really, really fine abrasive, a very weak, very fine abrasive.
But it would take a long time to correct baby's bottom by just writing.
Like years, really. Yeah. It's if it's an actual problem, it's not just like, just write with it for a bit and it'll get better. Like maybe a little bit, but not really. Yeah. Probably what's going to happen is you're going to end up writing with it a lot and spreading your tines, and it's going to gush ink more and sort of be compensating for it. It's not actually fixing the problem. You're just sort of making up for it. But so that's one way that over polishing can, kind of happen. But I think another way to think about, maybe it's not over polishing, because I wouldn't necessarily say I guess you could interpret it as over polishing, but if you're polishing a nib and you're not moving that nib, because essentially the tip of the nib has got a ball. If you're talking about a traditional fine, medium, broad, like a traditional nib, not a stub or anything like that, but just a regular nib, it's going to have basically a ball of tipping material on the end. It's got a slit cut through it, and the ink is traveling down through it, and it's got that little ball. Well, if you are smoothing that nib without changing the angle, without changing the rotation, and all you're doing is smoothing just one big flat spot in the same place, you can actually wear it away and create this, like, I mean, Drew referred to the writing pad. That's generally, you want there to, it's not a perfect ball. Like generally you try to shape it so it's a little bit of a I don't know, how do you explain this, Drew? So difficult just by explaining by words, but
there's like, imagine, an orb being a perfect circle, but then maybe there's a part of that orb that's less of it has less curvature to it. It's still got curvature, but not as an extreme circle. Maybe, rather than, it changes its radius a little bit.
Yeah, slightly less. Think about, like, you ever have one of those like inflatable, like kind of dummies, and you like punch it and it kind of goes down and then it kind of pops itself back up, and it's usually like weighted at the bottom.
Yeah, it's not or like a teardrop. At the very base of the teardrop, you're going to have a more extreme curve than up at the top of the teardrop. The top of the teardrop is going to be less extreme. The base of the teardrop is going to be very extreme.
Sure.
It's all curved, except for the point.
Yeah, but basically you want it to be rounded. It doesn't have to necessarily be a perfect ball, but you don't want it to be a completely flat spot, because then if you change your writing angle to much of any degree, or rotate it in your hand at all, you're then not going to be making contact with the inky portion of the tip onto the paper, and it's going to write kind of scratchy. It's going to skip a lot. So you want it to be pretty darn round. So I would say it's not necessarily over polishing. It's incorrectly polishing, I guess, or just over polishing in one spot. That is something that can be done by somebody who's trying to smooth a nib, especially if you're like newer and you just take a sheet of micro mesh or something like that, and you're just making figure eights all over the place, and you're not actually changing the angle of the pen in your hand. You need to vary it up a little bit so that you're actually smoothing it into a round kind of a form. Otherwise, you're going to end up smoothing it into kind of a flat pad, and it
might write well at that one specific angle. But it's not going to write well at any other.
It's not going to write well for everybody. Yeah, you're going to have to keep it at that angle that you smoothed it. So you try and go around a little bit. That actually can happen naturally just by writing. Like if you go to vintage, pen places, you get vintage pens, and you have somebody that like used their vintage pen like crazy for years and years and years. You can actually see nibs where there's a pretty darn flat spot. If it was the same person using it at the same angle over a long time, essentially they've done with that fine paper abrasive, they've done what a nibmeister would do with, say, micromesh or something like that. So it can happen over time just by using the nib, but it takes a really long time with like an actual tipped nib. If you have an untipped nib, it'll happen maybe a little sooner, but if you've got an actual like tipping material, that stuff's pretty tough, and it'll happen. So I would say just by writing with it, no, you really don't have to worry about it that much, maybe over a very long period of time, but you're not accidentally going to, do anything to the shape of that tip just by writing with it. Is that fair?
Yeah. The only couple things I'll add is that one thing that we looked at years and years ago, Brian, do you remember when stone paper was a thing?
Yes, that is true.
People started asking us about stone paper, and we're like, all right, what is the deal with this? So we got some in to just try it, and it's I don't know a ton about it, but allegedly it's paper made from finely ground, mineral particles and maybe a mix of pulp. Either way, it had some stone in it.
So I think the appeal of the stone paper was that it was sort of like water resistant. Like it felt very smooth, but it was like really durable, and it's
and it had a very interesting weight to it too.
It did, but it was basically like a thin sheet of plastic with stone dust on it.
Right.
So the stone dust was absorbent and allowed the ink to still hang on, but the paper was like waterproof and super tear resistant and stuff like that. So it was very interesting paper, but essentially
fascinating.
Stone dust, it was like writing on micro mesh basically. It was like an abrasive.
Yeah, he tried it and he looked at the nib afterwards, and guess what? it was flat.
I was like, ooh, this is not great. Do not recommend for fountain pens.
Right. So there is some paper out there that will do this way faster. Like Brian was saying, with traditional paper, yes, it would take years and years and years, and like that's your pen that you use like every day. But if you do buy some, more different paper that has some interesting qualities like stone paper or something else, there's probably some papers out there that could make this happen very, very fast. So we definitely do not recommend anything like stone paper or any weird sort of just pulp paper for use with fountain pens nibs, because even iridium, even the super hard alloy, not iridium, but the iridium alloy that's on top of the dipping material, even that doesn't stand a chance against this stone stuff. So don't mess around with that. Also, there are some nibs. The only ones that I can think of are the Omos gold stub nibs. If it's an untipped gold nib, that can happen very fast as well.
We've seen is not that durable.
No, absolutely not. And to this day, we don't understand why they would ever have a non-tipped gold nib. It's just
this is like right smart. When they were on the outs. So yeah,
we did used to sell them, and we would get them back, and even in a short amount of time, we could see that gold starting to wear away. So be wary of that. Be careful of that. Generally speaking, gold nibs are tipped. Even the stub nibs. If you have a stub nib on a steel nib, usually tipped. No, sorry, usually untipped.
No, untipped, yeah.
That's what I meant to say. But a stub nib on gold, usually always tipped. On some rare occasions, like Omos, probably some others out there that I'm just not familiar with.
That's the only one that I can think of recently, but there may be some older, like vintage ones and stuff. I don't know.
So there are some exceptions where that, wearing away a nib can be exacerbated with certain conditions, but generally speaking, it takes years.
I really haven't heard an issue much with steel stub nibs. I mean, you got a lot of surface area there, so it's not wearing away as much as it would if, with a traditional like fine or medium tip size.
Right.
But I mean, theoretically it could wear away, but it would happen more than, a tip nib would, but hasn't been as much of an issue as you would probably think. Next question. This is from Potterwatch 221B. A pen or ink that didn't live up to the hype. Ooh, this is a touchy one, Drew. This is a touchy one because we gotta. These could be brands that we still deal with, and we don't want to go trashing anything or anybody. But we're gonna try to be honest. Like we didn't want to be like, oh, okay, we're just gonna say great things about everything all the time. No, we try to be real. We try to be real. But,
I would say that I believe that any of the ones that I mentioned would probably not be disagreed upon by the distributors. So the first one I wanted to mention is the first one I thought of that just popped right in there. It would be the Stipula Passaporto, the Superleggera Passaporto. So this was the second coming of the Passaporto. The first version was a transparent acrylic pen. It's a pocket pen that you posted into a larger pen. I believe it was eyedropper only, or did that one take a standard international?
It was eyedropper only.
Eyedropper only. Brian had one. It was neat. It was quirky. It was cool. Kind of looked like a lozenge or a gel cap or something like that.
A little bit, yeah.
And it had a pretty solid reputation.
It looked like a big Mike and Ike.
Yes,
that candy. That's kind of what it looked like. A Mike and Ike with a center band. Yeah.
So when we found out that Stipula was going to bring that back at a more affordable price point, we were like, okay, this is awesome. There's no other pen like this on the market.
Yeah.
Yeah, we expected there to be some differences because it was not being sold at the same price. We're like, okay, well, maybe it feels a little bit more plasticky, whatever. It's still a super cool pen. And there was that excitement just because Brian had one. We liked it. Coupled with that, the thing just got delayed and delayed and delayed for over a year.
A year and a half? I'm close to 2 years.
So, our wait list kept building. Our anticipation kept on building. Anticipation and, impatience and just like wanting to get this thing online. Yeah. But when it finally got here, it had problems. It had writing problems. It had eyedropper problems.
Had leaking problems,
It had capping issues. It had a host of issues. It's no longer sold.
We discontinued it pretty quickly, but then they discontinued manufacturing it altogether. Yeah.
It just fell flat, especially compared to how long it took to get on the site and how much we wanted it to be good. It just was not, and it was a real shame because I think it could be super cool, but it unfortunately had a host of issues that didn't allow it to reach its potential for sure.
I think there were legit issues with it, but I think it was coupled with the fact that, number one, the original one that came out it did have a fan following, but they were not ever really widely available. So those who had them talked good about them, but then everybody else had FOMO about not being able to get them, and they were like $125 or $150, the original ones. The new ones that came out were like $50. So I think people wanted them who had the FOMO that didn't actually have the old version, and they heard good things and built it up even more. And then when the new ones came, and not only were they not the original, but then they were what they were. Yeah, I think everybody got a big old wet blanket on it. So.
That one fell flat. And then now here's one that didn't necessarily have a lot of hype behind it, but I think should be a little bit more hype. So I guess it's more of an
more like an underrated
Potter Watch. Yeah, Potter Watch said pen and ink, so I went ahead and mentioned an ink. Okay. Private Reserve makes Infinity inks, which is a separate, kind of a sub line within their main line, and they are really good at not drying out. Even if you have a pen that doesn't seal super well, these inks are really good at staying ready to write. Even if you lay it down on your desk for a little while uncapped, it still can write, and these are a great option for if you do have a pen that doesn't hold a ton of ink in the feed or just is it dries out pretty regularly. I think these inks are awesome, and I use them for that. If I have a pen that I love and that just doesn't hold ink super well or doesn't capture well, I put an Infinity ink in there and they write much better. And yet when these came out, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing that these do that, and still they're just not as recognized as a thing, and I think it's kind of a shame because they do what they say they do. This is like, it's not just advertising or posturing. It's they work. So that was kind of a bummer that they didn't really explode as much as I personally thought they were going to. But and then there were two that these weren't. I don't know if they didn't live up to the hype, but so you've got the Lamy Ion, Brian, AION. This pen was a big pen for Lamy to do because they changed. This was the first nib since the 2000 that wasn't like the plain old Lamy nib. It still fit Lamy pens with those kind of rail and hook style design, but it was designed by a special designer that they came just to do this one nib and pen. Like Lamy pens don't happen very often, and when they do, they're like these are going to be around for a long time.
Yeah, they generally take, I think, 3 years on average to develop a new pen model.
Yeah, and so I think there was some hype around this one just because of the design aspect. They really drove home. I don't even know the name of the designer, but at the time they were like talking that up a lot, and it just kind of it didn't do bad. It didn't do great. It just kind of was like, okay, now it's here, and then it just kind of plateaued, and it's been fine. But I definitely don't think it quite lived up to the hype. I thought that just based on how rare Lamy does this sort of thing, there was more hype than it delivered on. There's nothing wrong with it, not at all.
Yeah, it's still a good pen.
It's a good pen.
I actually enjoy it. I like that it's a little bit thicker of a pen.
It is. It is a very comfortable pen.
Yeah,
for sure.
But just for whatever reason, it just didn't really take off. I just wasn't to a lot of people's preference or liking, and the Studio I think is still a much more popular metal pen that's kind of in that price range. And then you got the All-Star 2, which is less expensive. It's more of a known thing, so I think it was sort of filling a void that wasn't necessarily there for a lot of people. So I don't know.
Same. And then the only other one I'll mention, still getting out of the not playing by the rules here, but the Galen Writer's Box. There was a ton of hype behind that, even though it's not a pen, it's not an ink. But it did have a ton of hype, and it just didn't deliver. We had problems with the latch and the wood.
Yeah, it's solid wood, and I was like, I really hope this thing works well. But it's like being made of solid wood. I was like, we might see some issues with like warping and fit and stuff like that, especially like shipping stuff to different parts of the world. Like wood can
different climates.
Wood can get pretty messed up. Yeah, and we definitely saw some issues.
Yeah, and I'm sure that Galen has corrected this issue. But when we dealt with it, there was a host of issues that caused it not to be successful for us. But other than that, those are my big ones, Brian.
Yeah, that's fair. Did you mention? Oh, you didn't. The Platinum Mix Free, that ink.
Yeah, I had that on here. I thought about it. I don't know how like hyped it was, but we did sell for a long time a set called the Platinum Mix-Free Ink Set. It came with, a bunch of bottles of ink, a pipette, some instructions on how to mix colors, some empty vials so you can mix up and just kind of play with it. And we thought that was super cool. And they just didn't move. Like that appeal just was not a mass appeal. And man, you remember how long those things chilled in the warehouse?
Yeah, well, when we first got them, so the way, ink mixing is this really interesting, falls in this interesting place in the pen world. It's definitely for the people
that
they like to experiment, right? So there's a lot of people that mix ink and stuff like that. This is also at a time when you didn't have so many boutique ink companies, and this is probably like almost a decade ago. So you didn't have the Robert Osters, and you didn't have, some of these other boutique companies. Colorverse wasn't around,
and Sailor wasn't doing their thing to the extent at which they're doing it now.
You didn't have any of the Diamond Shimmer-tastics. You didn't have any of the Inkvent or any of that kind of stuff. So it was a little bit more conservative just in terms of when inks were coming out. And so I think that the notion was, let's come out with a set of inks that everybody can mix up. And they came out, what was it, like 9 different colors, I think it was.
Oh, I don't remember.
You could mix them all to varying degrees to get this grid of like 81 different colors or something like that. So it was like, well, that's really interesting, but I think it was just like the average pen person. It was like $200 some to get. And the set initially only sold as a set. So it was like a big investment. It was so many options for mixing and stuff like that. It was just like, it fell in such a small niche that most people were just like, nah, I'll just buy an ink that's already a thing.
Yeah.
So I think it fell into that place. And we've had other ones, the Peniter mixing set. And we've had other ones, you can mix a lot of Diatramentus and some stuff like that. Pretty much every ink mixing thing that we've tried to introduce has like, there's a few people that get really excited about it, and most people are like, yeah, it's too complicated. I'd rather just buy the color that I think is going to work for me, and then that's it. Because the problem is, even if you mix an ink and you really like it, if you're buying a whole set of it, well, then you're going to mix more of that ink, and you're going to use up, all of 1 or 2 of the colors, and then if you can't replace those colors of themselves, then you got to buy a whole new set.
Right. Yeah, so there's you're left with the yellow and the orange or whatever.
Sure. So there was literally nothing wrong with the inks, but I think it was just, it was trying to, again, fill a need that wasn't necessarily there. Yeah. And I think some of the fun of doing stuff like ink mixing and all that stuff is like, you like to experiment and have the freedom to kind of mix whatever you feel like. But when you like put it into an intentional set like that, it feels, restrictive in that way. So I don't know. It's never really taken off any of the ink mixing stuff that we've done.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say that most of the stuff that we've sold that hasn't done well wasn't really that hyped to begin with. So I had to think about this a little bit. And again, none of these are like awful products. There were some, like the Passaporto was like really a flop. And this next one that I have was kind of a flop, the Stipula Splash. So they were attempting to do a steel nib flex pen, which it sort of did, but it's the pen body was too close to another, like, I forget if it was like a Jinhao or something. Like the body of the pen just felt very cheap. The pen, in terms of how it actually performed, like it did flex, but it was super hard and it was not a very pleasurable experience and stuff like that. And people just really dogged on that thing, and it eventually went away as well. So, it's like, I really appreciate when pen companies try and do new things, but if they don't like fully, tick all the boxes of what people are really looking for, it's usually not going to work out so well. So anyway, another one that I have, this one is, I was a little torn about including this one, but I think it's fair to kind of put in here the Platinum Curiosities. So this is the click retractable platinum pen, which I think for what it is a good pen for a good price. But I think what everybody ended up doing it was comparing it to the Pilot VP, and it's not a Pilot VP, it's the Platinum Curiosities, and it's not the same price. It's like half the price. But so many people kept talking about it and comparing it to a VP that when it came out, people were like, oh, this thing feels so much cheaper and it's so much lighter and blah, 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 and it's not a VP. And it's like, yes, it's not a VP. Like no one is saying it's a VP, but I think just making the association of it, people were expecting to get a Pilot VP for half the price. And that just people had a really hard time getting away from that. Couple that with, they did have some legit feed issues, some feed cracking issues, which they did fix. But when you have something like that at the onset that happens, when there's already an expectation that people ran away with, I think that took the wind out of the sails for the Curiosities. Couple that with the fact that it all happened when COVID was starting, and it was all, I mean, literally it was like that March, April timeframe in 2020 when this thing was coming out. There were already a lot of people confused and distracted and stuff like that anyway. It just made it kind of a rough takeoff for the Curiosities, which, you know, the pen's still around. I think it's still a good pen and worth considering as long as people understand what it is and what it's not. So I think that one got also a bit of an unfair take, but it's, you know, it stands on its own over time.
Yeah, and they also had that weird last minute price increase too that I think.
Yeah, there was some miscommunication.
It was one price, and then right before launch, you know, there was the solid price that it would launch with, and I think that kind of that set a negative tone.
I think I think it had to do with, especially the price in the US. I can't remember. I'm trying to remember the details of it. I think either it was like not going to come with the converter, but then they decided to include the converter, but they had to raise the price to include the converter or something like that.
Yeah, it was like it was already getting that like, I don't know, is it going to be better than the VP? So they were already making that comparison. So and that was there.
I don't know if you remember. Maybe it didn't. I can't remember if at launch it came with a converter or not. I feel like maybe it didn't. But then we had converter shortages too because of COVID and all that stuff. So not only did that pen come out and then had these issues, but then we literally didn't have converters for Platinum for some time.
Right. I think it always did, but I think the fact they didn't have converters meant that the Curiosities was not in stock for a good long while.
Yeah, I can't remember all the details of it, but basically it was a host of expectations things, stock issues,
there
all
was
that
a
kind
lot
of stuff.
Issues.
And then people online started crapping all over it, and then it's hard to dig yourself out of that once that becomes the narrative, you know. Yeah. So and then the other one that I had was the Lamy Safari USA, and look, it's a fine pen. It's still a Lamy Safari, but you know, it was the distributor.
People know what they did.
Yeah, the distributor at the time, I mean, they basically frankenpenned a Lamy, which, look, you know, it's like Lamy, they got to make things in some pretty large quantities to be able to sell, you know, the pens at the price that they do. There's economies of scale. So it's going to be much more economical for them to do regional exclusives and stuff like that if they're taking parts they already have and are rearranging them in a new way. And we did that to a degree with, you know, our exclusive pen. So it's not
totally
like
different.
It's not like I'm dogging on that process, but the sort of misstep that happened around that was that the distributor at the time, who's not the distributor anymore, they made it a no discounting pen. So it was required to be sold at full MSRP. So there was some hype that came from the distributor at the time. They came up with the arrangement for this pen, and it was like, okay, cool. Like, let me say, like, okay, it's all for that. But they were a bit, you know, they kind of missed the mark when setting the pricing for it. So when it's the regional exclusive, but it seems like it's a more expensive pen because you're required to sell it at full list price when that's not usually how it works for Safaris, then everybody really kind of dogged it because they were like, it's literally just different parts of a pen and you're charging more for it. Now they did custom packaging and stuff like that, so there were some value adds there, but I think a lot of people were just like, this is not enough of a value add for what you guys are trying to charge for it. So,
yeah,
you know.
And there might not have been like a ton of hype behind it because from the get-go, people knew what it was. Like, it was very obviously a frankenpin.
Yeah, it was more like...
But I think the hype comes from the fact that this is not something they ever do.
Right.
And like a regional exclusive like this from Lamy, like, oh my gosh, like that's amazing. But then the principle was incredible, but the execution was just not.
Yeah. I don't think it was hype so much as like everybody was like talking about it and leading up to it and stuff like that. But I think it was just like there's such a reputation for these releases that it's kind of in the community, like it's known that like it's kind of a big deal when one of these comes out. Yeah. So, you know, I think there was just like, I don't know if you want to call it hype necessarily, because it's not like it was being promoted everywhere and all that kind of stuff.
Well, I don't think this particular pen was hyped, but I think, you know,
it's more the situation.
I think that's valid.
Yeah, and like we you know, we are authorized retailers and we were working with a distributor at the time. I genuinely think they were pretty well intended, but they were a relatively newer distributor at the time. A lot of them didn't come from the pen world, so they didn't fully understand. You know, they came from other, you know, retail industries and stuff like that, like fashion, like clothing industries. They didn't really understand that, like, yeah, if you're going to charge more than what's been charged for like ever Safari for a long time, like it's not going to be received so well, even though it's a limited item. I guess it was more common in like the fashion world for things to be like that. And we were just like, yeah, I don't know how that's going to go. And then it kind of went like we thought it might.
Yeah.
So I don't think anybody was malintended, but it just didn't hit the mark. So anyway, again, Lamy, great company, not trying to dog anybody. Look, anytime you're trying to do something new, trying to launch stuff, do interesting things, especially with product types that haven't really been done before, you're taking a risk and you're not always going to nail it. And we are guilty of that as anybody. All right, Drew, what's the next one?
Next one comes from Dennis Roy 23. And Dennis Roy 23 asks, what is your favorite broad nib pen?
Oh man, this is tough.
Yes.
This is tough. I hate answering questions where I'm asked specifically for the one thing. Partly because I just use so many pens. I'm like, I think, like, I know which ones I really like, but there probably is something that I really like that I'm going to forget and then not mention and be like, oh, dang it. Yeah, I should have said that.
No one's going to know, Brian.
Yeah, I mean, I love a lot of broad nibs. To me, broad nibs are not that different from each other. Like I like most broad nibs because they're just very forgiving. I think that if you're talking about fines and extra fines, the variety of experience of writing with them is much broader, much greater, than broad nibs. Broad nibs, they all kind of fall into a group. Some might be springier than the others, some might be slightly wetter than others, but they're all going to give you a similar type of experience. But some of the ones that I really stand out to me is the 14 karat nib that Lamy has, not the Lamy 2000 nib, but the ones that they have. And again, they don't have a lot of pens with this nib on there. But the ones that do, they're generally going to be, obviously more up there in price. So they have it on certain like special edition studios and other, they've done it on CP1, they've done it on some other ones at random times like the Emporium and stuff like that. So they're not that easy to come by, but boy, they are fantastic. They're so smooth, surprisingly springy given how small those nibs are. And they're gushing wet. Like it's one of the it's one of the few nibs that I'll still pick up now after, a long time of using them. And I'm still just like, ooh, yeah, like I get like an audible reaction every time I use one of those. So that one's definitely up there for me. I don't know if it's number one, whatever. The Sailor King of Pens broad nib. Love that. I specifically have one that's on one of my favorite pens of all time, which is a Japan only blue with clear finials that I bought when I was in Japan. We didn't even sell Sailor at the time. I was like, this pen is so fantastic. And that bicolor nib, oh, it's gorgeous. But Sailor's broad nibs, I think, are probably some of my favorite just because, their nibs are not as glassy smooth like Lamy's are. They have a little bit more tooth to them, but they are very springy. That nib is just massive and it's just like gleaming in your face as you're writing with it. It's pretty glorious. So I do like that one a lot. And then Pelican also has some pretty fantastic broad nibs.
Oh, yeah.
Specifically, I like the bigger Pelican pens, but the M600, just something about that broad, it just hits the right frequency or something. I don't know. That's definitely Rachel's favorite nib is that Pelican M600 broad. But I guess if I had to pick one, it would probably be that Sailor King of Pens. Maybe it's just the affinity I have for that specific pen. I really like, I like the really, really smooth writing broad nibs, but in terms of, actually just practically writing with it, having a little bit of tooth to a broad nib is not the worst thing in the world to me because it kind of grounds you a little bit. Otherwise, you feel like you're just slipping all over the place. But that Sailor broad nibs feels very controlled. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the biggest appeals of Sailor.
Yeah. So I think if I had to pick one, I'll pick a different one probably every day that you ask me. But that would be the one that I would choose today as we're recording.
Brian, that might be the most impressive hypothetical where you had to choose a thing you've ever done.
Really?
I'm very proud of you.
I'm getting better after 51 episodes of this.
I am very proud of you. That was really good. You named a few, and on your own, without any prompting, I'm learning. You selected one.
I'm learning. I'm growing as a person.
That is impressive. I owe you some Waffle House after that one, my friend.
I'll take it.
All right. My favorite is a Lamy 2000 broad. I prefer the medium, but if I had to pick a broad, Lamy 2000 broad. That
put
thing
it
is
on your bingo card.
Do what?
Put it on your bingo card.
Oh yeah,
Lamy
I can't help myself. But I will say I have a gold Yovo double broad.
Okay. Ooh.
And I know.
Oh, that falls into like the
I know
friggin' not even a garden hose.
I know
fire hose.
So I can't say I've ever had a gold Yovo broad, but if the broad writes just a little bit slimmer than the double broad and is otherwise pretty similar, that one is amazing as well.
The broad is fantastic as well.
Yeah,
that's
so I've
got
to
super. That falls into like where that kind of the Lamy 14K is. It's like super gushy, super wet, super smooth.
I love that. Love that.
It is pretty great.
But the Lamy 2000 broad, like that thing is such a gusher.
It's a little. I feel like that's a little stubby too.
It is. It absolutely is. Like you look at that thing, it looks almost like a stub nib. It's like it's like a brick.
I would
backpedal.
I would backpedal a little on what I said before about like most broads are the same. That broad is a different broad.
That is a very different. Well, that's the Lamy 2000 nib in general. Like those nibs overall are just different. They are just shaped differently.
In a league of their own.
Yeah, I feel like the fine and extra fine are shaped like a brick standing up, and then the medium and broad are shaped like a brick laying on their side, like just kind of like a rounded rectangle on both sides. But so I will still say the Lamy 2000 broad, number one gold nib. Twisby broad, probably number one steel nib. I think that they do a really good steel broad, I'd say.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, and that's me.
Oh yeah, I went all gold on mine. I didn't really go with steel. I mean, honestly, the Yovo, like, are not to self-plug whatever, because it's made by Yovo, but like
anybody's Yovo, yeah.
Our Goulet broads, like I really like them. Or like a broad on like an Edison, which is also Yovo. Like it's pretty great. Like as far as broad steel nibs go, just that number 6 size steel broad is just it's a great writing nib all around. So
it is.
Yeah, good stuff. All right. Moving it along from a donkey.sanj, we have best entry level gold nib ? Drew, we got some fervor behind this question here. Some confusion and excitement.
A donkey is confused and excited about the potential for
the possibilities.
An answer here.
What are the possibilities here?
This is not a hard question for me because without a doubt, the E95S best entry level gold nib. It's the most. Not only is it the most affordable that we sell here at the Goulet Pen Company, but it definitively provides you a very gold nib experience. If you're looking to say like, oh, you know what, let me go for a gold nib, the E95S is going to give you a different writing experience than the steel nibs that precede it price-wise. So not only are you going to get an affordable gold nib, but it is actually going to perform differently. Whereas there are gold nibs out there at higher price point that aren't going to perform much differently than steel nibs, just because they're not meant to. They're not meant to be a little bit more bouncy, a little bit more springy. The E95S, though, it's a big nib. It's inlaid in a way that you don't see at any price range before it. And it offers a little bit of spring, but not too much that you're going to be like out of control like a Falcon and not know what you're doing. So it's a great starting point. I love it so much. I will not stop talking about how I love it so much because I will absolutely die on that E95 hill. Followed by a Vanishing Point. The Vanishing Point was one of my first gold nibs, and I got mine in extra fine, which is very, very fine. I would not recommend that as a first gold nib or entry-level pen. Okay. I would probably stick with a medium, but I think that for the size of that nib, which is a tiny nib, it actually is surprisingly bouncy and comfortable.
Yeah.
The downside to the Vanishing Point is probably the ink capacity because you've just got a Con 40 in there.
Yeah.
But you could easily refill a cartridge and be more happy than you would be with the Con 40. But the actual nib and the performance are really comfortable and very consistent. So those two, in that order, E95S, Vanishing Point. Both Pilot, I know, but it is what it is.
It's okay. You're a fanboy. You can own it.
It's a fandom based on fact, man. I'm telling you, it is. Those they are tried and true.
Yeah, I think most people would agree with you. In fact,
there are plenty of people that would say like, "Oh no, that's not my thing," or they're ugly. But I don't think anybody's going to say like they suck as fountain pens, like they don't write well. That's just not. Yeah, you're not going to go there.
It's probably more polarizing for the Vanishing Point, just because it's such a unconventional design.
Right, but no one's going to say it writes poorly.
Yeah, generally speaking, it's pretty hard to dog on those in terms of how they write. Pilot makes some fantastic nibs.
Yeah, so from like an entry-level gold nib standpoint, aesthetics notwithstanding, if you're looking for that, gold nib performance that's actually going to give you a different experience, if you've only experienced steel nibs, I think either of those two are going to provide you with that, and at under $200.
It's pretty tough. It's harder and harder to find these days. So I would agree with you because quite literally, I have it on record of me agreeing with both of those picks because I've done some videos on top entry level gold nib pens. I think I've done 2 different videos, and I believe both of those pens are on there.
Gonna have to link that.
Definitely link those. Check it out. Just type in Goulet, best gold nibs or entry level gold nibs or whatever into the YouTubes, and it will be populated in front of your eyes. So check those out. I have some other pens in there too. I would stand behind every single one that I mentioned in there, though I think 1 or 2 has been discontinued. Like I think the Platinum 5000A was on there. That pen's no longer made.
Well, you did on the older one, but you did a new one.
Yeah, I did a new one, so I kind of refreshed it a little bit. So yeah, I would say, I do like the Lamy 2000. We talk about that a lot, but my first gold nib pen that I personally owned and used was the Pilot Custom 74. You may or may not have heard. It's still such a great pen. It's such a solid pen. I definitely stand behind that as a top contender especially in terms of its actual writing performance. I understand that it's a demonstrator pen. It's, it's not the kind of style of pen that everybody's gonna love, and that's fine. It's got the Con 70, so if you're not really prepared for what that converter is, it can be a little weird for somebody that doesn't know what they're in for on that. But it also takes cartridges, and you can use any of the Pilot converters on it, and that's fine. It does have one of the largest ink capacities of any converter pen if you use it with the Con 70. So, for those that like to dog on it, get over it because it's awesome. So no, but
it's a refillable cartridge with a button.
Yeah, it's great. You get all the ink capacity and more of that cartridge, but you don't have to use a syringe to fill it. Sounds exactly right. Yeah, that's what you're looking at. No, but seriously, I really like that pen. It stood the test of time for me. I still pick up that pen and write with it, and I'm like, dang, this is just a great writing pen. My personal one that I first used was the medium, which tends to write a little on the finer side, because that's kind of how Pilot does, especially their thinner nibs. I would say the fine is also a really good pick for somebody kind of new to it. The extra fine, you kind of now got to know what you're getting into because it gets so fine. I would not necessarily tout that as the one that I would pick up first unless you really, really like fine nibs. And the broad is a really nice writing broad as well, though sometimes that broad squeaks a little bit. I don't know if you noticed that, Drew. It likes to make a little bit of noise.
I've actually found that if a nib is going to squeak, broad Pilots tend to be the squeaky ones.
It's just weird. I don't know why.
The most I've seen were the broad Falcons tend to do that a lot.
Yeah, I don't necessarily know what it is, but whatever the case, you get that every now and then, but they write really well and smooth. But I find the medium to be the most versatile. You get a lot of good, you get a very smooth experience. You get a little bit of line variation if you write with some pressure. That nib is nice and springy. It's about equivalent size to like a number 5 size nib. So like the nib size you'd have on a TWSBI 580 or something like that. It's not as big as you might have on, a pen with a number 6 nib. That would be more like the Custom 823. That's a number 6 equivalent, kind of nib. So I like it. I think it's not as big as some other nibs that you'll get, but in terms of how it writes, it's just great. I love that nib. So I would say a medium Custom 74 is a great entry-level nib experience because it was mine and I had a wonderful experience, and I would go back and do it all again because it was so good. All right. Next one.
Okay.
Yeah.
6x6 Matt is taking us home before we begin our lightning round. And Matt asks, if I have to leave ink bottles untouched for 2 years, would it be okay upon my return? Let me just say, if Matt, you were being deployed for any reason or something like that, thank you, and best of luck to you.
Is that the situation here? I don't know.
No, but I was just thinking, if someone has to leave for 2 years and cannot bring their ink bottles with them, I don't know.
That is a very specific amount of time. So
yeah,
I don't know, but yeah. I would sure hope so, because goodness knows I have many bottles of ink that I've left for
that was my first
well
thought,
over
Brian.
2 years.
Yeah, you have ink that you have not opened since I've known you.
Oh, I think that's going on, over 10 years now.
Absolutely.
I have well over 200 bottles of ink in my personal collection. And as to my knowledge, none of them have changed in any significant fashion. I have some ink that was, that I decanted into other bottles 13 years ago that I've used that are still fine. So, not to say that all ink's fine and you don't ever have to worry about it. I mean, ink is mostly water, and as we discussed in real time about an hour ago, but in published video time 2 episodes ago in episode 49, where I talked about how disgusting my kids' kiddie pool gets when you leave it outside for a couple of days, stuff grows in water, especially when there are outside contaminants. So, definitely it's possible for stuff to grow in your ink, but most fountain pen ink companies are putting biocides and they're putting other things in there, and it's sealed in a container and it's in a relatively controlled environment. And there's not a lot of air exposed to it and stuff like that. So I would say that, if your ink level is lower, there's more air, you've written with the pen on different types of paper, and there's dust and paper fibers and stuff like that. You've been dipping back into that bottle. You've exposed a lot of contaminants. You've left the bottle sitting open for longer periods of time for potential mold spores and dust and whoever knows what else is in the air to perhaps get into your bottle of ink. The more of that stuff that it's been exposed to before you set it aside and it's sitting there for 2 years, the more potential there is for something weird to happen in that ink. That said, it still doesn't happen often that we hear about people's ink being ruined after a long time. I think the biggest issue you end up with is perhaps some dehydration happening from the water that evaporates out of it, especially if it's not sealed really well, or if it's not stored in like a cool, dry place. The dyes that are in these inks are not generally very light fast. So if you leave the bottle of ink, say, on a shelf, and it's not in a box, and there's sunlight or whatever UV light from your room that you're in is hitting that dye for 2 years, some of those dyes could break down and the color could shift a little bit over time, So you could end up with some of that stuff that's a factor, but I think generally speaking, your ink is going to pretty much be, safe and usable, unless you have some really extenuating circumstances. I mean, I've got, again, many, many, many bottles of ink I've had sitting there for a long time, and I have yet to have one. And I don't take extreme precautions to do anything special with my ink. Many of these inks I have, I do store a lot of them in the boxes, but not necessarily everything. I do have.
I would say none of them are exposed to direct sunlight for sure.
Not direct sunlight, but they're on a bookshelf in my office, and there is sunlight that comes in, so it's not like I keep it stored completely out of there, but it's the kind of thing like the more it's exposed to it, the faster the dyes will break down. So if you leave it sitting on a desk that's right next to a south-facing window, if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, and it's getting blasted with light every single day, that's going to break down quicker than I have it in the back of my office, that faces the west, and it rarely gets any direct sunlight. Like, that's going to be a better situation. So, a lot of it comes down to pen storage. A lot of it comes down to, ink storage. A lot of it comes down to how much it's been exposed to the outside elements before you store it. Especially if it's a new bottle of ink and you haven't even opened it yet, you're going to be fine. That thing will last for a very, very long time. So, yeah, that's what I would say.
I agree. Really sweat it. I know that I have a couple of the samples, the ink samples, that actually predated my employment, so over 11 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And I can't say that I've used them, but there's no floaty bits in them. They don't look weird, and they honestly are not evaporated at all. They still look, a little bit over 2 mils in there. So,
there you go.
And those are in sample vials. Those are not even like actual ink bottles. So, and tightened by hand over 11 years ago. So, I echo what Brian says.
Yeah. So it's, let's put it this way: do what's smart and sensible around it, but you don't need to go like way out of your way to try to do anything fantastic, to try to do it. So yeah, if you're going to be storing it, you knew you weren't going to use it for 2 years, I would put it in a box where there's no light, and make sure, don't put it in your attic, put it in a place that's room temperature or slightly cooler. Keep it out of direct sunlight. Make sure the caps are sealed, and don't worry about it. Just,
If you really wanted to, you could put it in like a Ziploc freezer bag or something like that.
You could if you want a little extra sealedness.
Yeah, if you know you're going to be gone for 2 years, it's not going to hurt anything.
Won't hurt. Yeah. Very cool. All right, Drew.
All right, Brian.
That's all our regular questions. Now we got a lightning round, huh?
We do.
Oh, boy. So what's the goal here? How quickly are we trying to do this? Just so I know when I blow past it.
Based on memory card activity, I think that we need to do this in less than 27 minutes for sure.
Oh, I got 31 minutes, Drew, so I guess you're moving around a lot more, using up more data on your card than I am.
Maybe, that's not surprising. So I think that 30-second answers, just definitely under a minute.
Okay. A minute,
so
30. Okay, gotcha.
Let's make brevity the goal.
Fair enough. All right.
Okay, well, we've got a lightning round ready to go, Brian. So we've got 6 questions, 3 for each of us, and we're going to try to answer these things in less than 60 seconds apiece.
Now, are we both answering these, or because I see like you have your name asking me, I have me asking you, but
we are not both answering because we're not both answering these.
Oh, okay.
100%.
I may add my 2 cents in. Can we heckle each other as we're answering the questions?
You heckle away, man. Heckle away.
All right. Is there a time limit on the amount of heckling that we're trying to do? I'm just trying to be clear.
Infinite heckling allowed.
I'm just trying to be clear on the rules. Okay, good.
No, the more heckling, the better.
All right. Well, then let's kick this thing off. We got 6 questions, so it's not so bad.
No, we can do this. All right. Boom. Lightning round number 1.
Let's do it.
And this is from 3 Summers 1 on Instagram, and he asks, "What power tool did Brian most recently use?"
Okay. Depends how you define use.
Oh, come now.
If I was holding
First question, you're going to do that?
If I was holding it in a photograph?
No.
Is that considered using it?
No. God.
I'm trolling you as I'm answering my own question.
Jeez.
No, the most recent power tool that I actually used was my TIG welder because I'm practicing TIG welding aluminum. And
really, you haven't even used like a drill or anything since
no,
then?
No, legitimately, that was the last power tool that I used because I did trim some tree branches, but I did it with a pole saw by hand. Teeth. There was no power.
Oh,
I was the power tool. I am the power tool. I feel like there's already a t-shirt that exists, I'm sure, that says that, but yes, I was the power tool. And then I didn't even it was like getting dark and I was like, I just want to drag them over to my part of the yard. Like, I'm not going to go get the lawnmower or whatever. I'm just going to drag them by hand. So I literally just cut, like you get those branches on the tree. I'm so going past the time. I don't care.
Yep.
You're mowing the lawn and then you just get like branches are hitting you in the face and you're like, I'm sure just like ticks are everywhere and just dropping all over me. So I went around last night and cut all the low-hanging branches that I would normally run into, just because now there's tons of leaves on all the trees and the branches are sagging. So I cut all those so it's nice and clear. And then I just dragged them by hand over in the corner of my property there. Did not use a power tool. So yeah, literally TIG welding was the last power tool that I used, which I feel that's pretty cool. I feel like that's a legit power tool to say. I didn't want it to be like, I used a power screwdriver to fix my, I don't know, kids.
Are you implying that people that use power screwdrivers talk like that, Brian?
No.
Because I am personally offended by that.
That is how I talk when I'm using a power screwdriver.
Oh, okay,
so
fair
I
enough.
think that's true to my
You know what? I have heard you do that. I've always wondered.
I do. I do use different voices depending on the tools that I'm using.
All right. Let's go to the next one.
Okay. All right, Drew. Which is smoother? Oh, sorry. This is from Hussein Sobani. Which is smoother? Lamy 2000, Lamy Gold Nib, I'm assuming like 14 karat, and the Pilot Gold Nib.
Pilot Gold Nib.
Any of them. Are you sure about that?
Yep.
You sure about that? Smoother than a broad nib 14 karat Lamy nib?
In my experience, like I have had some Lamy broads, and Lamy is just not quite as flawless in their production consistency as Pilot is. They have a tendency to sometimes be really, really smooth, sometimes a little more tooth. Pilot, though, is way consistent on their nibs, way more consistent than Lamy in my experience. I think that it's possible that there is a 14 karat Lamy nib that is smoother than 823 broad, but generally I've found Pilot to be more smooth overall.
Fair enough.
All right.
We're like bingo haven today. We're saying all the tropes.
Well, I know we are, yeah.
Yeah.
Banana is a Hannah asks, do scented inks have clogging capability like shimmers, Brian?
Do scented inks have clogging capability?
Yeah, like do they have like scented particles that are going to clog my pen?
Do they have the potential?
Yeah, well, like let's say are they putting actual, begonias in my scented begonia ink?
I would say generally speaking, no. I do not have any facts on this, but I don't believe that it's particulates that are in these inks that are causing it to have scent. I believe it's some kind of like, I don't know, essential oil or some kind of liquid scented something or other. It's not going to like, you're not going to see floaty bits in your scented inks that are going to physically block the flow of the ink like it would have the potential to do with a pigmented ink or a shimmering ink or something like that. So nor have I really heard of that being an issue with scented ink specifically. So while I would say, maybe it has a potential, it's definitely not something that I've heard about being an issue with clogging anywhere near what, say, a shimmering ink would be. So I would say no. It has its potential to smell more, but not much else.
All right.
Maybe clogging your nose, perhaps, as you're smelling it. But your pen should be fine.
Okay.
All right. Next one. This is from Dumbledore's arm. And then it was cut off.
Army, probably.
I want to say armpit. Dumbledore's armpit. Favorite video game, childhood and adulthood counting.
All right. I'm going to do you one better. Dumbledore's armpit, whatever. Top 15. Mass Effect 2, Final Fantasy X.
Top 15 video games?
I've got them ready to go, man.
Who's the one that gets all the crap for not picking the one thing?
I just recently did this. I did this on Instagram. I made a whole list with corresponding pictures and music, so I have the list ready to go. So I'm just going to go through the whole thing. You'll get the number one. I mean, obviously, it's number one.
Oh, so it's like a countdown?
It's a countdown in order. You betcha, man.
Okay, as long as there is a number one.
Unlike you, I love hypotheticals. I'm always ready to cast judgment.
All right, fine. Fair enough.
All right. Mass Effect 2, Final Fantasy X, God of War 2018, Witcher 3, Mega Man X, Final Fantasy Tactics, Assassin's Creed 4, BioShock Infinite, Mega Man 2, Metal Gear Solid 3, Final Fantasy 7, Uncharted 4, Donkey Kong Country, Chrono Trigger, number 1, Red Dead Redemption 2. Boom.
I don't know what most of those are.
Well, that is your loss, sir.
It is my loss. I'm just realizing how much I haven't done since I've had children into business.
You have probably learned more life skills than I have. You're welding. I'm wasting my time playing video games. I know I'm wearing a Castlevania shirt and didn't mention any Castlevania. It was number 16.
What's up with that?
I haven't the games I mentioned. I've replayed more times than I've replayed any Castlevania games.
Fair enough.
So, yep.
All right. Good deal.
All right, Brian. Quilter Meg is asking you specifically.
Okay.
Brian, can you eat mangoes? Wondering because of the urushiol.
Oh, I can eat some mangoes.
Can you? I did not know mangoes contained urushiol. For those of you who don't know, Brian is sensitive to that.
Okay, so I had to look at this. Actually, apparently the skin of the mango, if you're eating like just below the skin, can actually like make your lips tingle and stuff like that. Some of that's there. No, so I did research this a little bit because I've sort of heard about this, but obviously, if I had like a reaction to eating mangoes, I would not eat mangoes, but I do eat them pretty regularly.
I can eat some mangoes.
I can. In fact, fresh mango on like tacos, total game changer. But then again, I like pineapple on pizza, so I love fruit and meat together. It's just a thing. I'm all about it. Like, give it to me. I don't even care. You make fun of me. I don't even care. But yeah, mangoes on tacos, it's the best. Drew's weird face aside, so I did a little research. Apparently mangoes and cashews, actually, both of these trees come from the Anacardiaceae family. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that correct.
Nailed it.
Which do have urushiol. It's my understanding it's not in the fruit. Cashews it's on the shell of the fruit, which is why you can only buy shelled cashews. And that's often why cashews are roasted. You can buy raw cashews, but it's it's harder to do that without having them contaminated with the urushi. But they have had like outbreaks and stuff with that in certain situations in the past. So they usually roast them because that actually gets rid of all the oil. And little fun facts. But it's not necessarily the fruit that has it, but it's like the leaves, the stems, and the roots. So I've never like cut a fresh mango off the tree and eaten it before. Then I would probably have some issues. But all the mangoes I've been have been like store-bought. And I would imagine there's regulations around these types of things because I'm probably not the only person that would have issues if you were buying the fruit and getting poison ivy as a result, or whatever. So I've never had a reaction through the food, only through plant contact. So I will keep eating mangoes until it makes my face explode. So yeah, love me some mangoes.
All right.
And last but not least, Thinktas asks, what is the difference between the Pilot E95S and the Pilot Elite 95, Drew? What's the deal?
Nothing except for what's printed on the cap. The Elite says Elite, and the E95S has the LITE removed, so it's just the leftover E from Elite chilling there to represent the E95S, but it doesn't actually say E95S. They're just like, let's just cut off the Elite and put the E there. So
why would they do that, Drew?
Yes.
Why?
I don't know. I have an Elite. That is the one that I have.
Oh, really? And, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yep. And it's way cooler, just FYI, because it's got the E is identical. They literally kept the E and deleted the rest of it.
Do you actually know why there is a reason why they gave it a different name? Do you know?
It was because of some sort of copyright thing. There's an Elite something they couldn't use.
I believe it's Parker. So in the U.S. and obviously other countries, I am no lawyer. I only know but so much about these types of things. But in a lot of countries and places like that, this happens a lot with like car companies too. They have a lot of cars that are just called different things in different countries. A lot of the times it has to do with various trademarks that are already taken up in certain countries, or perhaps sometimes this is not the situation with the E95S or the Elite. There was a trademark conflict, and the way that it works in the US, because I've looked into this a little bit, you register your trademark based on the class of product. So that's why you can have like Delta pens and Delta Airlines, and it's not a problem because you're not selling pens and flying airplanes in the same whatever space in the market, if you will. So you can have your trademark for different classifications of products. But apparently because there was another pen company that had the name Elite, they had to name it something different. So they just shortened it and twisted it and made it weird. And it's the E95S because they were like, well, that's not going to be a trademark issue because that doesn't make any sense. So here it is. And that's it. The pen itself is the exact same thing though, from what I understand. Like Drew said.
It's weird. I just realized, Brian, I only gave you one fountain pen related question here in the lightning round.
That's okay. That's all good.
It's just about the ink, and then you got power tools, mangoes, and
we have a lot of videos out there about me talking about pens. I think it's okay to mix it up every now and then.
Yeah.
And we didn't have like the normal what's happening section or anything like that in this one, so I feel like it's okay to mix in some like
Well, that's stuff. It. So even if you have random nonsensical questions to ask us, still send them in. I'll save them until we have one of these days. But
there you go.
We'll get to it. Generally, if you either put a question in an Instagram poll that I put out or send us a question through the email, I save them all. So, eventually we'll probably get to you.
Yeah, give us a few years and we might get to it in episode 4.
Eventually, every now and then I'll ask, hey, what should we talk about in the Pencast? And then there's always somebody that says pens. So congratulations. We
there you go.
Answered. Yeah, we've done it.
Nice. Cool. Well, we'll wrap this thing up. So thank you for watching, everybody. Please leave us some feedback. Let us know how we're doing. If you like this little format here, basically it was either this or we don't record one this week. So do you like this better than nothing? Basically is what
I
I'm
really hope
for.
They say yes. I'm going to feel really upset.
I feel like we're inviting some trolls to be like, y'all should.
I'd rather you do nothing.
I'd rather sit quietly and stare at my blank computer screen for an hour and 9 minutes than listen to you guys talk about it. I'm just kidding. No, if you're here, if you're listening to this part of it still, you're a fan. Sorry. You can't deny it. And definitely check out gouletpens.com for fountain pen, ink, paper needs, all that. That's how we fund this whole thing because we don't get paid on YouTube, that's for sure. You can email us at pencast@gouletpens.com if you have more questions and other things like Drew mentioned. And I have a random fun fact that has nothing to do with pens, but it does have some math that I think is pretty cool. So it's on brand. Oh, no, it's cool, Drew. It's cool. Trust me. Well, actually, you might not like it.
Math and cool in the same
math.
sentence.
Oh, yeah, it's cool. Okay, so every time that you shuffle a deck of cards, you get a combination that has never existed before. Did you know that? There are 52 unique cards in a deck. So the odds of any given deck combination is 52 factorial, which is 52 times 51 times 49, it's 50 times 49, et cetera, all the way down to 1. So if you do that math, it works out to 8 times 10 to the 67th, or an 8 with 67 zeros after it. That's how many different combinations there are in a 52 card deck. That's enough that if every person on Earth were to shuffle a deck of cards every second for the age of the universe, there will be 1 in a trillion chance of 2 decks matching.
What?
It's basically impossible. It's a huge number. Yeah, isn't that rad?
That is surprising.
Yeah. So think about it. Every time you shuffle a deck of cards, you are holding complete uniqueness in your hand. Humanity will never see that deck of cards ever again.
Wow.
See? That's cool math. Isn't that cool math? Okay.
That's cool math.
There you go. Share that fun fact with your friends. Dropping knowledge bombs here at the end of the Pencast. Thank you all so much for watching. We'll be back next week with our regularly scheduled Pencast. Hope you enjoyed this one. Y'all take it easy. Thanks so much for watching, and right on.